We'll start. And usually we meditate at the beginning, but actually I was thinking on the way here, I'd actually rather I'll present just one topic and then we'll meditate. I'd actually like to meditate on what we're talking about today. I think it's a good topic for meditation. Um, so we can just pause, generate our motivation. So as the section we just finished, right, the qualities or the aspects of Buddha nature, it says, without realizing the nature of your own mind, right, without achieving the Dharmakaya, actually, there's no final nirvana, right? There's no, it's just Buddhahood itself. So that means that if we don't achieve Buddhahood, we don't fully achieve our own purpose. And we're not able to achieve the purposes of others, right? Which is love, passion. So we generate this wish of bodhicitta, or this mind of bodhicitta, to fulfill the welfare of others and also ourselves, the final welfare, the ultimate welfare of others and also of ourselves, to remove all of our own obscurations, mental afflictions, their imprints and their subtle imprints, which achieves our own welfare and it makes us capable of being of ultimate benefit to others. We generate that kind of wish that we're studying this Mahayana topic of bodhicitta, the Uttara Tantra, with the motivation of bodhicitta, with the wish to achieve enlightenment for the welfare of all beings. And with that in mind, we can do the verse of refuge in bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, through the merits of generosity and the other perfections. May I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of generosity and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And then so last time we finished a whole section of those 10 sort of aspects or qualities that describe what Buddha nature is like. And now we're going to start on a large section of the text, which is 9 similes related to Buddha nature. And this is a famous, important part of the text. It comes actually from a sutra, so that Maitreya took these 9 similes from what's called the Tathagata Garbha Sutra. So that Garbha can be like essence, or it can mean womb, or it can mean seed. Right? And Tathagata is like an epithet of the Buddha, one thus gone. So usually that's what's translated as Buddha nature, which is not literally translated as Buddha nature, actually. But in English, we've sort of come to that term. But Tathagata Garbha, right, Sutra. So the Buddha taught these 9 similes originally, and now Maitreya in this text kind of explains them. And I guess I'll say a couple quick general comments. Like one is, this whole topic of Uttara Tantra is chapter 1 is quite wonderful. That's my feeling. It's covering it again. We're actually teaching it is maybe again appreciate how wonderful it is. But I think like some of these similes will be there's 2 points. One is there's something to meditate on and contemplate, and then also I think if you think about them some as we go through them, there'll be something that also sticks in your mind. If that makes sense. Like you'll remember them. They'll sort of which is, I guess, one of the benefits of metaphors and similes, isn't that they make it easier to remember something or sort of get a feeling for something sometimes than just the purely sort of the list. Like, actually, I don't think most people will remember the list of 10 aspects. If you memorize them, you can, that's good, but these, I think, will stick in your mind quite well. And I was thinking about how to cover them, and I think I'll cover them the way Maitreya presents them. Like, there's sometimes people sort of, I don't know, he presents them in general, and then he goes through the meaning of different, like the meaning of different parts of the simile gradually. And so I think we'll just do it that way. Like, there's sometimes people like, actually, for those who copies here actually, but somewhere. But that at the very beginning, and we can send them out again if people need. But there were charts, and these came from the basic programs. I think at I don't know where, maybe at Instituto Lama Tsongkhapa or someplace where it was taught. There are like some charts, and there's PDFs of them. Oh, good, some people have them. They were definitely sent out that sort of go through these similes, and there are 3 different kinds of charts. One is quite detailed, like this is a number of pages, and then there's like a less. Then there's like 2 versions that are just 1 page each. Look at it with the correspondences, but anyway, we'll get to those later. But so how Maitreya starts is he says, so he says, actually, I'll start at the top of page 16 where he says the Tathagata essence, right? That's the translation, I guess, by this author of this translator of Tathagata Garbha, right? So the Tathagata essence has been set out by way of these 10 presentations, right? Then it says 9 similes. At present, the basic element dwells within the shell of afflictions. It is to be known by way of examples. So, I just want to pause there because this is the introductory statement, right? So the basic element dwells within a shell of afflictions. And that's going to be given, explained by way of examples, right? So I want to point out something, which is that, actually, just notice your own experience. When I say that line, the basic element, like notice, introspect for a moment as I say it, the basic element dwells within the shell of the afflictions. Right? Like if the feeling comes up that it dwells somewhere. Like sometimes when we say, oh, this dwells somewhere, you can think, oh, like, is it in there? Is it over there? Is it here? Right. But when it says dwells within the shell of the afflictions, right? So that means what is the shell of the afflictions? It's actually your own experience, isn't it? Like, so in other words, if you get craving for something, that's the shell of the afflictions, right? Like if you get mad at somebody when they do something, that's the shell of the afflictions, right? If you feel that you're better than somebody or worse than somebody, that's the shell of the afflictions, right? So every time you have like an experience actually of the mental afflictions, that's the shell, right? And then so what does it mean? So it's not somewhere else, it's in your own. The shell of the afflictions is our experience, actually, right? And then ignorance is, of course, pervades, according to the Prasangika Madhyamaka view, which is presented by, grasping at a self of persons and phenomena is a mental affliction. So, so the shell of the afflictions is something that's always with us. And this is saying the basic element, right? The Buddha nature dwells within that. So do you get the feeling? I mean, I wanted to pause just this line. It could seem like this is why I want to go slowly through it the way Maitreya presents it. That's not an intellectualized statement, right? What he's getting at there is like the basic element, meaning your Buddha nature, the ultimate nature of your own mind, is very close. Actually, Kyume Kensho Rinpoche, I was looking at my notes from when he taught this, and he said it's very close, which is a funny way to put it. It's right here, actually. In other words, it's never separate from you. And when you're at your most afflicted, your most miserable, it's right there. Right. And so it's never somewhere else, right? Like, so if you feel like, oh, when I said, what is it, dwells in the shell of the afflictions, if you had some feeling like, oh, wow, I've got to go on a trip to go find that, or pilgrimage or go somewhere external, it's not there, right? It's here. It's wherever your mind is, right? Because so again, I'll just go over that again then. So at present, right this moment. So at present is important too, right this moment, right every moment, right? And it'll say this in the metaphors. When you were in hell, it was right there, right? That was at that present moment too. When you're hurting somebody else, it's right there. Right? So Buddha nature is never, so at present, the basic element, Buddha nature, dwells within the shell of the afflictions. And why is it to be known by way of example is because we don't see it, right? So so the Buddha gave these 9 similes or examples, and you'll see in the similes it gets at this point, that the problem is we don't see the basic element, the Tathagata Garbha. And so these 9 examples or 9 similes are in part designed to help us see how we have afflictions, but they're particularly designed to help us see how dwelling within them is this very valuable thing that we never notice. Yeah. And so, both the Buddha and Maitreya are trying to help us actually through these similes to see something we're missing. Right? And so then there's what's called a short illustrating how the removal of the obscurations will reveal the essence. So it says a short presentation. So first, Maitreya gives a very brief listing of the 9 without explaining them, and then he's going to explain them, and then he's going to explain them again. So here are the 9. We'll just go through them the way he presents them, right? So again, these 9 come from the Tathagata Garbha Sutra. And so I'll read, so right? They are like, so Buddha nature is like a Buddha in a decaying lotus, honey among bees, grain within a husk, gold amidst filth, a treasure of jewels in the earth, a seed, or here it says a seedling, and so forth within a fruit seed, or a statue of the conqueror, meaning the Buddha, in tattered robes, a king or a lord of humans in the womb of a lowly woman, and a precious golden image inside of clay, in a clay mold. And then he says, similarly, the basic element of natural purity abides within sentient beings obscured by the adventitious defilements. So again, I'll make a few points just from this initial one, right? He says the basic element, and now he says the basic element of natural purity, right? So what is that? That there are 2 types of Buddha nature, right? The naturally abiding Buddha nature, which is the ultimate nature, the emptiness of our own mind, and then there's developing Buddha nature, which is our current level of love or compassion or wisdom, which can increase. So here he's saying the basic element of natural purity, the naturally abiding Buddha nature, right, abides within sentient beings obscured by, and then this word adventitious defilements, right? So, and he's making a point there, right? That all of our defilements, all of our mental affliction, in this sense, defilements means mental afflictions, right? Led by desire, hatred, and ignorance, and then there are all the other elaborations of those. And so again, reflect on this for a moment. One point is, again, that natural purity always abides. That's one point, right? It always abides within. And then who are these sentient beings obscured by adventitious defilements, right? Actually, that's me. That's us, right? Like whoever still has mental afflictions. If you're a Buddha, then that doesn't apply to you. But if you're, if you're not a Buddha, then you still have, even if you don't have active mental afflictions, you have their subtle imprints, right? Like an arhat, for example. But And it's also others, right? And there is when you see, and so one point I want to make here is, I was thinking about this too. Mostly we have to apply it to ourselves, right? We have to meditate on our own Buddha nature because you initially realize the nature of mind focusing on your own mind. But it's also quite useful, and we'll say this later in the text, to reflect on the Buddha nature of others when they're obscured by mental afflictions, right? So, we've said that before. When a Arya Bodhisattva looks at being who's doing something that's caught up in mental afflictions, what they see is what these metaphors are getting at, right? So they see, a Buddha within a decaying lotus, or honey hidden amongst the bees, and so on, right? So it's also a way of reflecting on, our own mind and also on the nature of others, right? So when and when we tend to be judgmental or annoyed or whatever, or something with others, then it's also useful to reflect on these 9 similes in order to change our perspective about others.
No, I was just thinking, the similes are already really powerful in the sense that, you can see other beings who are causing great suffering, perhaps. You can see that as like the tattered robes around the golden Buddha, as opposed to the golden Buddha itself, with the person itself, right? I mean, even that's just a helpful reframing of how you look at other people.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly the point here. And it's weird, isn't it? I mean, you're getting at a point, I think, which is true here, which is that when we look at others or at ourselves, we tend to identify with the wrong things, don't we? Like, whereas we identify with a more superficial quality of others or ourselves. Sometimes it's our, whatever. You could say this, like, actually, it's quite rare, isn't it, to mainly identify with the ultimate nature of the mind. And so actually just try that. I mean, this is why I was saying, actually, let's pause there, right? So try that. Like, actually, I mean, like, notice if you think of, okay, I'll use this for Washington DC also. I'll use this. Think of, uh, bring to mind 2 or 3 political figures. It's an election year and there's a lot of going on in media and so on. Like, so bring to mind 2 or 3 people who are prominent in politics. Often the people who are most prominent are the people who the media covers most because they say controversial things or something. And notice, how to identify that person. Like, when I think so and so, like, how does my mind identify that? And notice in your own experience, am I identifying them mainly based on the golden Buddha statue, or mainly based on mud? That's it. Or the golden, it said gold and mud, or whatever, like, so am I mainly, like, so if there's gold in the mud, am I mainly looking at the mud or mainly looking at the gold? And just try to play just for a moment, right? Just for a moment with what's it like, actually, just to know your own experience. What's it like when I focus on the mud? And what's it like when I focus on the gold? So the mud is the mental afflictions that are adventitious, right? As it says here in this text, right? The mud is the obscuring, adventitious mental afflictions. The gold in this simile is Buddha nature. Is that being the ultimate nature of that being's mind, the emptiness of mind, right, which has always been there, always will be there, and will be there when that person becomes a Buddha. So just go back and forth from. Okay. So it's not, this metaphor isn't saying the mud doesn't exist, right? It's saying the mud does exist. It's like, it's adventitious, so like mud on a piece of gold is there, right? But it can be washed off. So what's it like if I identify with the mud And then what's it like if I identify with the something deeper, right? Something hidden. The Buddha nature. And then notice, because part of this is, and then if I focus on both, right? That's actually a path to compassion, isn't it? In other words, if I'm aware that this being has Buddha nature, but that it's adventitiously or temporarily obscured by various mental afflictions, which then cause, right, suffering. Then the experience comes of wanting to remove the mental affliction, to allow the gold to shine. And I want to suggest while we're doing this to focus on yourself also now for a moment. So when you think me, I, again, do you focus on the ultimate nature? Like when you think, oh, me, this is me in the world. Do you focus on something related to mental afflictions, or do you focus on that goal, the ultimate nature of your own mind, your basic element of natural purity? Like, so when you think, oh, I'm going to the store, or I'm on a phone call, whatever, like the basis on which you're thinking, hey, is it mainly your basic element of natural purity, your Tathagata Garbha, or is it something in some way connected to mental afflictions? And what's it like, actually? If you identify in relation to yourself something in some way connected to mental afflictions, and then what's it like if you shift your focus to, and can you, to what extent can you allow yourself right now to do that, actually, to shift to the Buddha within the lotus, within the decaying lotus, or to shift to your nature is the honey, not the bees. Your nature is the gold, not the mud. And what's that like? Because your Buddha nature is temporarily, adventitiously covered over by mental afflictions, their imprints, then there's suffering, but they can be removed. And your ultimate nature, even right now, already, is primordially pure, is naturally pure. And just stay with that. I just want to meditate for 1 or 2 more minutes. I want to ask you to think of a time when you were most caught up in mental affliction. particularly caught up, right? When you were feeling hurt and angry or extreme craving, some very overwhelming mental affliction. So think back to that time. Read that quote again, right? So even at that moment, the basic element of your mind, right? The natural purity of your mind was abiding within you, temporarily obscured by adventitious defilements. But those defilements never touched, never stained that natural purity. Any more than mud can permanently damage gold. So you see how it applies to others and to yourself. These metaphors, these similes, rather. And I'll keep going. I'll return to the text for a few minutes. So and here Maitreya very briefly just says, goes through them, right? So the defilements here are compared to a decaying lotus, bees, a husk, filth, earth, a seed, tattered robes, a woman tormented by fierce suffering, and the earth constituent, or clay, I guess, really. And then the naturally pure, precious, basic element is compared to a Buddha, honey, kernel, gold, treasure, a banyan tree, a precious statue, and a supreme lord of the continents, meaning like a universal monarch, and to a precious image, the ninth. So he's just listing those. But again, go back to that phrase, right? The naturally pure, precious basic element. And again, I'm just saying with that, like when it says natural, because I notice this for myself. Like when I read something like naturally pure, precious basic element, at first the feeling that comes up is as if it's someplace outside of me. That's like I think, oh, the naturally pure, precious basic element. My feeling, even after studying this text and loving it, and so on, and thinking about it quite a bit, my first impulse is to go, wow, where's that? Like, some kind of feeling. Yeah.
It also seems very extreme. It doesn't seem like something we've incorporated in our lives.
Yeah. And that's why I keep pausing. It's like we have to work against that. Like that's what Maitreya is trying to get us to do here, right? He's trying to get us to actually notice something inside of us, in our being, in our nature, that we don't attend to, right? So he's doing it over and over. And that's why I, at first I thought, oh, like, be like I like the charts. I find them quite helpful, but there's a danger, I think, in doing it the way the chart does it. That's why I thought, oh, we could do it, go through it very quickly, kind of say, oh, well, here's this, and this corresponds to that, like you do in school as a kid. Like what would be like, here are the states, and here's their tree, and here's their state bird, and here's their capital, and memorize them or something. But this is not like that. This is actually a meditation. So Maitreya is presenting it as a meditation because we don't see, and you're going to see it in these metaphors. He gives examples of. Well, let's actually do the first one because I think it starts to get at it. So he goes through each, and he's going to go through them a few times because the repetition is a meditation. Does that make sense? That it's not, he's doing that on purpose. So he says, when seeing that in a lotus of poor color, right? It means like a kind of, what's the word? Like actually, I was thinking about this. He's getting at something like the other day. At home, Shayla had picked some flowers, and one day I looked at them on the table. She put them on the dining room table, and I thought, oh, how pretty, because they're nice. There were two different kinds of flowers in a vase. And then a few days later, I was like, a feeling of pleasure arose, like a pleasant feeling. Like, oh wow, I didn't know they should pick those and nice and sort of pleasant feeling arose. And then a few days later, I went to eat breakfast and I looked over and I was like an unpleasant feeling arose. It was like they had wilted and all the pollen had fallen on the dining room. A bunch of pollen and some like shriveled stamens had fallen onto the table, and I was like, oh, like some unpleasant feeling arose for a moment. And I thought, well, of course that's normal. That's what flowers do. They will, you know. This is getting at that, right? So in other words, the lotus at first looked quite, what's the word, radiant, and pure, and then it sort of collapses and sort of dilapidates. So when it says a lotus of poor color, what it means is like a lotus that's wilted. So when seeing that in a lotus of poor color, there where dwells a Tathagata, radiant with 1,000 marks, a person with undefiled eye, divine eye, takes it out from the whirl of its lotus petals. Similarly, the Sugatas with their Buddha eyes see their own nature and even those abiding in the hells of no respite, which is like Avicii hell, if you're familiar. Those without defilements abide until the end of time, freeing sentient beings from their defilements through compassion. And then it says, just as the person endowed with divine eyes sees the Sugata within the foul lotus and breaks open its petals, the subduer, seeing the essence of a perfect Buddha within living beings, obscured by a shell of attachment and hatred and so forth, through compassion engages in overcoming those defilements. So do you get the point here, right? Like it is, so each time he's going to have a metaphor, right? So like there's this Buddha within a, like it was once a pretty lotus, then it wilted, it got old. So now it's like rotting, yes, but inside of it is a Buddha. It says here, radiant with 1,000 marks, right? So beautiful. Then it says a person with undefiled divine eye, right? So in other words, an ordinary person, if they pass by, they would think, oh, wow, look at that rotting lotus, that rotting flower. And that's all they would see, right? But the person with divine eye, which is a kind of ability to see through, like it's like divine eye in this case is like X-ray vision, like Superman, say it like that. They can see through and see, so they have like Superman with X-ray vision. So they can see the Buddha within the lotus, and so they remove the petal, right? They remove those rotting petals and clean off, what's the word? A little bit of the stamens and the pollen, right? And then the Buddha, that radiant 1,000 marked Buddha will shine. Right? So now it says, similarly, the Sugatas, right, the Buddhas, with their Buddha eye, right, the omniscience, see their own nature, even in those abiding in the hells with no respite, right? So even in hell beings, they see, what does it mean, their own nature, right? Buddha nature, right? They see that even those beings in hell, the ultimate nature of their mind is not different. I remember in the earlier section, it said is undifferentiable. So the ultimate nature of the mind of a hell being is undifferentiable from the ultimate nature of the Buddha's mind. And the Buddha knows that. So those without defilements abide until the end of time, freeing sentient beings from their defilements through compassion. And so now here, the important, I think an important part is think of yourself, right? So we think, okay, so this is saying the Buddha with their Buddha eye is looking at me, right? And I have obscurations. I have mental afflictions. I have ignorance. There's so much I don't, I make all kinds of mistakes and so on. And so even in this moment, right, the Buddha looks at you, at me, and says, so here, think of it that way, right? So the Sugata, like the well-gone one, or the blissfully gone one, with their Buddha eye, looks at you and me, right, and sees that the ultimate nature of your mind and the ultimate nature of the Buddha's own mind is undifferentiable, right? And sees the Buddha within you, in this metaphor, right, this simile. And they look at you with compassion, right? Because they see, oh wow, you're temporarily still, for now, you still have these adventitious defilements covering over your radiant 1,000 marked Buddha. And so it says, just as the person endowed with divine eyes sees Sugata within the foul lotus and breaks open its petals, the subduer, seeing the essence of a perfect Buddha within you, right, within living beings, obscured by the shell of attachment, hatred, and so forth, through compassion engages in overcoming those defilements. And here's what I want to, one thing that's worth meditating on is, like, so, you know, as we're reading this simile, this is the Buddha doing that, by the way, right? Like, I'm not a Buddha, obviously, I'm an obscured sentient being, but this text is the Buddha, is one of the Buddha's efforts to help us see our final nature, right? You know, so when, like, so when it says the Buddha with the divine eye, you know, like, and that's why at the beginning it was saying, right, that it's like, this is difficult, you know, it's difficult to realize, right? It said that at the beginning of the text. This is difficult to realize, but extremely meaningful. And it said part of the purpose of studying this text is to develop a kind of enthusiasm, right, for realizing the nature of your own mind, because then you can awaken to your Buddha nature. You can uncover your Buddha nature. And this simile is the Buddha's attempt to help us do that. That makes sense? It's quite beautiful, isn't it? Like, because again, when you read this, it could seem like, oh, well, Maitreya lived in India, and the Buddha, you know, lived in wherever, you know, actually Maitreya didn't live in India. Maitreya lives in Tushita, Pure Land, you know, but she's not in India, actually. But also Maitreya is anywhere. Maitreya wants to be, you know, Maitreya is everywhere. You know, there's that famous story I told at the beginning, right? When the Sangha did 12 years of retreat and then couldn't see that Maitreya, did years of retreat for 12 years, right? Maitreya, and couldn't see Maitreya. And then he left, gave up, and he left retreat, and he saw the dog, and he helped the dog, you know, it was dying. And then suddenly he saw Maitreya in the sky, right? And he said, where were you for those 12 years? Maitreya said, I was there the whole time. You just were too obscured so far to see me, but your compassion for this dog, which was me, manifesting as a dog, allowed you to now see my divine form as Maitreya. So why am I saying that now? Like, Maitreya is here, actually. Like, Maitreya can send out countless emanations. They say, you know, he's a 10th Bhumi Bodhisattva or Buddha, depending on how you view him. You know, so Maitreya is right there with us, just as he was with Maitreya, right? I mean, just as he was with the Sangha. And he and the Buddha are trying to awaken us to our Buddha nature through this text, right? Through the Garbha Sutra and the Uttara Tantra. And they're reminding, you know, and actually, you know, the problem, of course, is for being in Avicii hell, they're too tortured to hear. You know, like if somebody were to say to somebody at that moment, you know, oh, you have Buddha nature, the person would be like, leave me alone, I'm, you know, giving you whatever, you know, they would be too upset, right? We're like that sometimes. But here, like, you know, this text is like, well, you're calm enough, you're human, finally, you know, you're human. Let me help you see it. Right? Let me help you see you have this Buddha nature. Try to awaken to it in this life while you can. You know, like, this is a good time for that. And all your defilements are adventitious, right? They're all temporary. They can be removed. What's most essential, what's most, and even this, right, image, right? The decaying lotus, it's like those, once you start taking those off, they just, like, you know, you can take them off, right? The Buddha within is more substantial in the sense that, you know, and it's a metaphor, I think, for how our Buddha nature is what's the word? Undestroyable. You know, nothing can destroy it. You know, whereas the mental afflictions are adventitious. So you're starting to get the feel for the similes. We're going to get into more of the details. Each one has a different correspondence and a different meaning. But right here, where he says, you know, the foul lotus petals symbolize attachment, hatred, and so forth. He's being general. He's saying the mental afflictions, right? All the different mental afflictions. Then he's going to get more specific later. But Any questions before I go on to the next one? So, but we're gonna go back over them anyway, but Robin has a comment or question. Sure, volume's up.
I notice in the, outline that it says that this is establishing by illustration the adventitious nature of dormant desire. And I was just wondering about, just a little bit of an idea about how this illustrates attachment, because we would prefer it to be a beautiful, never changing lotus.
That was one thing I'll point out is I was noticing that the outline points get at what it's funny. I can't remember, actually, maybe it says at the beginning. Oh, with outlines from Galsupjay's commentary. So the outlines are from the outline top headings are from Galsupjay's commentary were added. So that's not from Maitreya, but anyway, one point I'll make is Maitreya himself covers that later. So that's one point. So we'll go into detail later when he'll cover why Gyaltsab is saying that here. But one thing that Maitreya will say later, so I'll say it now just on that one, is we'll get at why it's dormant attachment in a minute. It connects to not being in the desire realm, but being in the form, or when you're in the form or formless realms, attachment becomes actually dormant. But even in our experience, sometimes attachment can subside to some degree or to a large degree. But the reason why he goes through each one, like the use of the lotus for desire, is partly that's the experience I shared when I looked at the flower on the table. It's that that's the nature of attachment. Actually, is that we look at something and we think, oh, how beautiful. We get a kind of feeling of the three kinds of feeling, right? Described in the 5 aggregates. So it's a pleasant feeling, not an unpleasant or a neutral one. And then we want more of it. So we grasp, and we grasp at it as if it's permanent, which of course it's not. And so then everything we desire becomes like the decaying lotus, right? In other words, that when we desire the fresh lotus, but nothing stays fresh in samsara. No samsaric object will stay that way. And so the decaying lotus is actually, in a way, a symbol of how, is a reminder of how all of our desires are like that. In other words, that, and that's the process. Actually, that whole process is part of what obscures our Buddha nature, is that we grasp at something when it appears to us as a cause of happiness, but it's not a reliable cause of happiness. So the fact that the lotus is decayed is a symbol of how desire works within samsara.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
It made me think, you have a beautiful radiant Buddha inside a fresh lotus, and you don't want it to change. You're not, because you're attached to the beauty of that lotus, you're not trying to peel back the petals and when the Buddha gets beautiful, you leave it, and then it starts to go away, and it causes suffering. And then when it's decaying, you feel revulsion. Get rid of this lotus. Don't like it anymore. But the Buddha remains unchanging on the inside. It's a really bright metaphor.
Yeah, you get it exactly. And it's, in a way, it's, for me, it doesn't say this in the commentaries, but if you think back to what it said in the there was a section of the text earlier where it said like, permanent, right? Like one of the qualities of a Buddha, of the Dharmakaya, is permanence, meaning it stays until samsara ends, never tiring, never making, effortlessly working for the welfare of beings, blissfully, and so on. Right. Bliss was another characteristic of the, it's getting, I think, if you contemplate it, you can connect this back. Like maybe that's the right way to say it. It's not saying that explicitly here, but if you contemplate these similes, like you're saying, you can go back and think, oh, wow, yeah, like I look for happiness in samsara, which doesn't actually give it, when I look for permanence and I look for bliss and I look for self and so on in samsara, I end up frustrated. But it's in the Dharmakaya that one finds the ultimate nature of the self, that one finds bliss, that one finds permanence, and so on.
And it's right there inside.
Yeah.
It's obscured.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, get it. So do the next one then. So then it says, this is the second of the similes, a more detailed. So it says, just as a beekeeper seeking honey, seeing it surrounded by a swarm of bees, separates it with skill from the entire swarm of bees. And so, here again, yeah, I think this was, now right, so the simile is bees that are protecting the honey, right? And it's the beekeeper who could see, right? Earlier it was it was like the divine eye, the being with divine eye, like X-ray vision. But here it's a beekeeper knows, right? Oh, okay, this is the right time. This is where the honey will be. There's the honeycomb. The bees are going to protect it in this way. Like the honey, the beekeeper knows how bees work, right? Where they keep their, what time of year and where the honey will be and how they protect it. So the beekeeper looks at because actually I remember, like, you remember, I remember when I was a little kid, the first time I was like in a hike with a group of people. It was like, I don't know, Boy Scouts, I can't remember what it was, but we saw bees in the hive, and they said, "Oh, be careful," and like, somebody had disturbed them, and they were like kind of swarming. And I didn't, I wasn't thinking that there was honey there. I was just thinking, "Oh wow, I'm gonna get stung," and I was running, ran away or something. But a beekeeper would know, right? A beekeeper would look and go, "Oh, okay, I know what's going on here." So it's like that's part of the symbol. So it says, so the great sage with the eye of omniscience sees the basic element comparable to, right, and forever eradicates the obscurations that are likened to the bees. Even if the honey is obscured by billions of bees, the beekeeper separates the honey to use it as desired. In the same way, the uncontaminated consciousness in sentient beings is like honey, the afflictions like bees, and the conqueror skilled in controlling them like the beekeeper. And we'll get it. I mean, I don't want to jump ahead, so there's a lot in this, right? But of course, we'll say, Maitreya will say more about this later. But of course, honey's sweet, right? And that's yeah.
I don't know if it's all beekeepers, but beekeepers often can put their hands in pies and they will not be good. Because they get scientifically, they say they don't leave out this odor here. But it's pretty amazing to see them put their naked hands in a beehive and no sting.
Mm.
I mean, I think
That's
that
amazing.
part of getting in that state is what they're talking about.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it?
But there are people, I mean, in nature, people,
Yep.
they're sort of telling us we can do this.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, again, going back to what Robin asked, I probably shouldn't jump ahead too much, but it says here dormant anger, right? So the bees are a symbol, I mean, for various mental afflictions, but particularly for anger. And actually, do you have a sense of, I'm just curious, like if you pause and meditate on this one is like, one point is even when I'm defensive, like it's funny, right? Defensive and angry and what's the word? Guarded and trying to push people away, right? It's just an expression of my, right? It's like based on dualistic self and other perception, right? And it's where anger comes, right? Then eventually you think, oh, well, as soon as you have dualism, you're going to eventually get angry, right? Because you're going to think, well, this other is threatening to me, push them away, and so on, right? And so this isn't putting down the actual animal of bees. It's a metaphor it's a simile for our own experience, right? Of how we get, because we're in the dualistic self-other projection, then we get defensive and we want to protect ourselves and protect mine and push, keep others away from mine. And then we, think the other's going to harm me, and then we want to harm them and sting them and so on. It's a simile for that, right? And and actually, if you're with another samsaric being, then we just do it back and forth to each other. No, I push you away and you push me away, and I threaten you and then you threaten me, and it just goes around and around and around for eons if we're not careful. And what this is getting at is, what is the Buddha? The Buddha is like a beekeeper, right? So the Buddha is not actually and part of that is that, the Buddha sees the honey within, and as you're pointing out, and the Buddha is not is not afraid and is not defensive, but is trying to help you, is actually trying to help you wake up, right? To help you see your own Buddha nature. And I'm just going to go off on a very short, too long, but I'm going on a very short tangent. It's actually, for me personally, when I read this one, I think it makes me think of one of my Hume Kintsugi teachers in particular. Some of you have studied with him also, because I've seen him do this over and over. He just makes me laugh. Like people will be angry and agitated, and he's like the beekeeper who can put his hand in the hive, like in the sense that he just sort of smiles and laughs, and it's you can see on his face he's looking and going like, I mean, I've seen it on his face as I or other people have been agitated around him. You can watch his face, you can see he's looking like almost like trying not to laugh. Like, you really think that's who you are? This, like, as you're doing, he's like, do you think this is who you are? I mean, he doesn't say that, but that's the look on his face to me. It's like, are you this confused in this moment about who you are that you're mad at so-and-so about this? Like, that's not who you are, actually. Like, you're the honey. What are you doing? You know, kind of, he doesn't say that, but that's what comes across for me. I've seen him with myself, but also I've seen him with other people. Two people are having a thing with each other, and he's just looking at both of them going like, you're focusing on the wrong thing here.
It takes a skillful teacher to be able to do that without like coming across as like patronizing
Yeah.
or making anybody matter, right? It takes like,
Yeah.
I think that's a really amazing skill.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember once I was watching as two people walked into his room having a big fight. They were in a big argument. They each wanting him to prove they were right, you know. And he just started laughing so hard that they started laughing, you know, and then everybody was laughing. And then he was like, and once they had laughed, he said, you know, you're both wrong. Like, you know, like, I'm not going to side with anybody, and, you know, move on. Or, you know, they did. They, you know, sort of were able to reconnect. So, but yeah, it takes skill. And if you try to pretend you can see that when you can't, you'll get stuck. But anyways, you get this metaphor. We'll just keep going because then it's going to go into more about them, right? Next one is grains in a husk, right? So as the kernels of a grain in their husk are inedible by humans, those wishing to use them for a meal and so on must extract them from their husk, right? You know, I mean, you've had that, right? If you can buy grains like that, or if you're out in the field, right? You see, like, you can't use them to eat yet, right? In the same way, the basic element of sentient beings is entangled with the afflictions, right? So you can't get your nutrient. It can't nourish you, even though it's there, because it's covered still. So as long as the essence of the conqueror is not liberated from the defilement of the afflictions, till then the conqueror's deeds will not manifest in the three realms. And that part of that is so you won't feed others, right? It's like you want to use your Buddha nature to benefit yourself, but also benefit others, right? To feed others, but you can't until you learn to remove the husk. So it says, just as the kernels of grain, such as rice, buckwheat, or barley, when unthreshed, still with their awns and unprepared, cannot become a tasty meal enjoyed by humans, so the Lord of Dharma, present in sentient beings, whose body has not been released from the shell of the afflictions, cannot bestow the taste of the joy of Dharma to beings tormented by the hunger of their afflictions. So do you get the metaphor here? Here, it's just like, again, if you're going to meditate on this one, which is, I'm suggesting all of these are for meditation, right? So you would actually meditate like that, right? You would actually meditate feeling, well, all beings are starving, actually. And if you look around, it's not hard to do, is it? Like, in other words, you know, it's not Buddhist point, but I mean, remember, just made me remember Mother Teresa said that when she was feeding, you know, like she was helping poor in India, and then she said, there's not just physical hunger, but there's spiritual hunger of beings who are deprived of the most basic spirituality, actually, right? And so, you know, so in this meditation, you would look around and you would see like countless beings are tormented by the hunger of their afflictions, right? And they don't have any sustenance. And you would feel, I have like a humongous, you know, like, what's the word, like a granary, I guess you could say, a whole granary or a whole field or whatever, a farm filled with grain, right? And all different kinds, buckwheat, barley, and rice, and so on. So it's like I have this huge granary and this huge farm. They're all starving. So now I need to unhusk that, right? I need to mill the grain so that I can feed them. And how do you mill that grain? You do your practice, right? You meditate, you do the Dharma practices that remove the mental afflictions. You create merit and you meditate on the nature of mind, you develop wisdom. Because then you'll have sustenance for all those beings who are starving. And and the more we remove our mental afflictions, the more we're capable of doing that. And when we finally achieve Buddhahood, we're ultimately capable of doing that. And part of the metaphor here, right, is like, is recognizing there are a couple of implications here, I think, if you meditate on it. One is sentient beings are starving. It says that very clearly, right, in their mental afflictions. And that's easy to see if you contemplate it. Another point, though, that's implicit here, right, is like you have a limitless supply of grain. Right? And that one is hard to see sometimes, isn't it? But that's what Maitreya, and again, it's Maitreya or the Buddha pointing out, you have the sustenance within you, and it's a limitless supply. It's like a unending supply of sustenance that you can give to others. And Maitreya is saying here, I mean, implicitly, right, because that's the metaphor, or the simile. If you don't see that, you're not seeing yourself accurately. That you have this, what's the word, limitless supply of sustenance for beings, because that's the nature of the Dharmakaya, isn't it? It's the nature of the three kayas, that they manifest limitlessly everywhere for sentient beings. So, it's pointing out you have this capacity that you, and it's like, I mean, I almost take this up at moments, if you contemplate it, as Maitreya kind of saying to you, to me, to us, please notice, this is who you are. Like, please, like, this is your nature. Please notice it, because it's there, and you're not seeing it, right? Which makes sense, right? Because he can see it. Buddha can see it. That's what he said in the beginning. Right? The Buddha with their Buddha eye sees that in us. And the Buddha is saying, like, please notice it, because with it, you can help yourself and others. Don't stay blind to it. So that's part of the benefit. That's part of why they're giving these similes over and over, or these various versions of similes, rather. I'll do the next one then. This is the gold and filth. So it says, just as the gold of a traveler has fallen into a filthy, rotten place, that has fallen, rather, into a filthy, rotten place, would not deteriorate for many hundreds of years because of its indestructible nature. So do you get the metaphor here? It's like, here the metaphor, right, is that like some rich merchant was traveling and like had a extremely valuable piece of very pure gold, but it fell in the mud, right? And it got covered in the mud. So then that's the situation we find ourselves in. Then it says, so the filthy, rotten place, right? Like mud and whatever. Maybe sort of poop, something. But just because that piece of very pure gold is in filth, it doesn't change, actually, right? Like, in other words, it's no less gold, after hundreds of years or thousands of years even, that piece of gold would be just as pure of gold as it ever was, but it's sitting in the mud. That's the metaphor here. And then it says, and just as a God endowed with a divine eye, right? And this is like a being in the God realm, right? Not the creator God. That's Buddhist text, right? So it's being like Vishnu or Brahma or Shiva or any of the gods. So just as a God endowed with the divine eye, upon seeing it, tells the person, purify this supremely priceless gold and craft it into something precious, like a statue of the Tathagata. So do you get the metaphor here, right? Is like, so again, like, we ordinarily identify with the dirt, And isn't that sad? I mean, that's actually, if you meditate on this, it's really sad, isn't it? Like, in other words, it's like, can you imagine that? It's like you're standing there, right? Look, imagine this, the metaphor for a minute. Like you're standing there looking at some smelly dirt, right? And you're complaining, maybe. You're going like, oh, this is gross. This is so ugly. Why is this like this? Oh, it's so muddy, right? And there's gold there, right there, right? And you're not noticing it. And if like, so now imagine for a moment that you're like this God, endowed with divine eye, and you see, oh, this person's complaining, but there's gold right there, you know. And if they take that gold out, they'll be wealthy. They can make a statue. They can also have extra. They can buy whatever they want. They can go where they want. They can do what they want. You know, they'll have their own freedom, and they can make something beautiful for others, is the point, right? But they're not seeing it. And then go back to the meditation we did earlier, right? Think of yourself and how sometimes we identify with our mental afflictions when there's gold right there in them, right? Hidden in them. Because that's what it's saying, right there. At the moment you feel hatred, at the moment you feel craving, at the moment you feel ignorance, at the moment you feel pride, at the moment you feel jealousy. In that moment, even right then, right, the gold is right there. It's not that it's somewhere else, right? When you're jealous and whatever, it's not the gold has gone somewhere else. It's right there, right? Very close, right? It's right there. Yeah. And it can sustain you and others, right? But you're not seeing it. We're not seeing it. I'm not seeing it. And it's indestructible, right? In this verse, it says that gold is indestructible, untarnished, right? Always pure. But you're identifying with the mental afflictions, so you're not seeing it. And then apply the same thing, right? Think of that. Go back to my example from earlier, whoever it was. You know, think of that, or think of a you know, right now use that one, or the political figure you don't like. Right? It's gold within the mud. And then think of how you see the person, right? And or it could be the same thing would apply, right, to anybody you're annoyed with or whatever, you know. It's mental afflictions, but within the mental afflictions is gold, which can be fashioned into a Tathagata, right? Which can be fashioned into all kinds of things that are needed by beings, and then inspire beings and that beautify the world. Then it says the meaning. Similarly, the conquerors see the qualities of the naturally pure basic element in sentient beings sunk into the afflictions which are like filth. In order to cleanse the mire of the afflictions, they let fall rains of sublime dharma for beings. Isn't that beautiful right there? I mean, pause there, right? So it's like, so the Buddhas, right, are pouring down rain, right, of dharma to help you and others purify the mental afflictions and cleanse the gold. And then, so the question now, and for us, right, as reading the text, is the Buddhas are doing that continuously for us. And then you have to ask, so what am I doing? Right? Like you contemplate, right? Like contemplate, am I like, Maitreya through this text, right? And so on, the Buddha and so on, are trying to help me uncover the gold and purify the mud. And I guess, like, actually, I mean, for myself, when I read, sometimes I think I'm trying to block the rain from falling on mud. Like it's kind of stupid.
You're revolted by the mud. You're trying to get away.
Yeah, which is crazy, isn't it? Like, anyway, you get the point, right? Like, so, and yeah, Robin.
The thing that, I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but the
No.
thing that keeps coming up with this for me is the whole idea of trying to lose this sense of an inherent self, and we're constantly being duped by this self-grasping objectivity. And so sometimes we might go too far because there's an element of like reifying Buddha nature. You know what I mean? We might you fear that you're reifying this objective existence. So it's like a conundrum: how to know, how to refute, a certain element of inherent existence, but embrace Buddha nature at the same time, this thing that's beginningless and endless. So I think that maybe we get stuck in that. Oh, this is just my grasping. And for this sounds ridiculous, but for the first time, I'm seeing that bodhicitta really unlocks that, because if it's a benefit for others, maybe this is a way. But for ourselves, like I felt like I was in tears when you were first doing that first meditation, in terms of seeing ourselves that way.
Yeah.
Like you just said, I'm identifying with the mud constantly. It's like, an element of Lam Rim. We're looking at, all of the defilements and everything, and trying to take that step next into, the medium level practitioner, or even higher level practitioner. It's a little bit difficult to make that transition to believing in this purity of Buddha nature and not reify it at the same time, right? It's really hard. It's like hard to grasp at what, this is, this Dharmakaya essence, that it is beginningless and endless. But anyway, thank you for
No, thank you. I agree. It's true. I mean, it's hard, and the text itself says it's hard. Maitreya has said at the very beginning, said, that's what he said, there's 7 Vajra topics, right? They're hard to penetrate. But you made me think of something actually, which I'll share. It's not direct. I mean, it's not. I mean, it's not an answer. It's just a reflection. But as I study Uttara Tantra in various ways, I noticed that there were a number of commentaries by some Kagyu masters that said this, and then actually I was up in New Jersey studying with one of my teachers recently, and he mentioned the Uttara Tantra, and we weren't studying that, but we were studying something related to Vajrayana or Tantric Buddhism. But he made a point actually where he said he was teaching on tenets actually in various scriptures, and he made a point that I thought was interesting, which was the same point that I think Gampopa made, who was a student of Milarepa, which is that that in some ways the Uttara Tantra is not a tantric teaching. It's not a Vajrayana teaching, in other words, but that it's like a transition or a bridge to Tantra. And I'd read that, but I hadn't heard it from one of my teachers before. But he said it explicitly. And he said, by contemplating the Uttara Tantra, it sort of these teachings, it helps you practice Tantra. It prepares you for the practice of Tantra. It's a support to your practice of Tantra. He didn't say that much detail. He just said something very brief about it. But I reflected on it after he said it, and I was like, oh, I get it. Because Tantra really, without going into Tantra, that's not the topic of this class, Vajrayana Buddhism. There are basic program topics that are about that, but this one's not. But one comment I would make is actually, I'll make 2 points. One is, Vajrayana Buddhism is a subset of Mahayana, so you can't practice it without bodhicitta. Is one point. It's just another set of methods that one practices as in conjunction with the 6 perfections based on bodhicitta. But the whole emphasis, in a way, or a large part of the emphasis in Vajrayana or Tantric Buddhism, is this sense of identification with natural purity, with the natural purity of one's own ultimate nature. And Yeah, that's true, isn't it? All, I mean, the main methods of Vajrayana Buddhism are a focus on, or maybe not focus on, but require actually that one focus one's main self, self-identity on one's natural purity. As it's taught, and they mean the same thing as the Maitreya means here, natural purity in the sense of the emptiness, the emptiness of one's, and that there are unique methods in Tantra that we'll get into today, but I just thought that was interesting to contemplate that, Robin, in relation to what you were saying, that when one tries to practice Vajrayana Buddhism, it's actually exploring this same territory, which is, how do I shift my identification from the mud to the golden Buddha statue, right? Or to the, yeah, and that's, I mean, that question that's raised in Maitreya's text here is also raised in those practices. How do you do that? How do you shift your identification? Because, in Vajrayana Buddhism, if you're identifying with the mud, it's not working actually, right? One has to dissolve the mud.
It's dissolving into subtler mental states where this naturally occurring consciousness dwells or something like that. Doesn't really dwell, but yeah.
Yeah, so we have to dissolve that identification with the mud and really identify with what is here in this simile, a gold that can be made into a Buddha statue, right? And if you think of it, it's actually a great metaphor, isn't it? Gold, because the gold in this metaphor is the ultimate nature of your own mind, which you then fashion into a Buddha statue. That's, if you look at Maitreya's thing, right? He says, this supremely priceless gold, purify meaning, wipe off the mud, right? And craft it into something precious, like a statue of the Tathagata. So Maitreya here is saying, meditate on the ultimate nature of your own mind and fashion that into a Buddha, right? Which is actually what Vajrayana, I mean, is a good simile for what one is. I mean, it's a good simile for what Maitreya is saying here, but it's also what we do when we practice Vajrayana Buddhism, or what we're trying to do. So I think Vajrayana provides methods for meditation on in this same territory.
Thank you. That's helpful quite a bit. Thanks.
Yeah, it was helpful when my teacher said that, because I had read it and I was like, oh, when he said it, I was like, oh, okay, wow, that's really helpful. I mean, he just said a little bit about it, but it's helpful to think about in the context of this text, because, well, he was talking about this text. And he was also saying the Tathagatagarbha Sutra, these sutras, he was saying that this whole set of the Tathagatagarbha teachings, actually, he wasn't just, the Uttara Tantra was included, but he was saying that this set of teachings that can serve that function. Tathagatagarbha teachings, which are, taught in the Tathagatagarbha Sutra and Lion's Roar of Sri Mali Devi Sutra. There are a number of sutras that are sutras of the Tathagatagarbha that teach Tathagatagarbha. And then, to finish this set of verses, then he says, so just as the being in the God realm sees the gold dropped into filthy, rotten place and earnestly shows its supreme beauty to humans so that they might completely clean it, in the same way, the conqueror sees in sentient beings the precious essence of complete Buddhas fallen into the filth of the afflictions and teach them the Dharma in order to purify that base again. And again, I just want to, I mean, you get this by now, I think, but I just want to say again, so apply that to yourself, right? So using this metaphor, right? So there is, it's you, right? So in other words, you can think of for others too, but think for yourself, right? When the Buddhas, the conquerors, right, the Tathagatas, when they look at you, because it says insentient beings, that's you. So when they look at you, what they see is the precious essence of a complete Buddha, right? So the essence, the garbha, right? That's what they're translating. The garbha, womb, the seed, the essence. They see the seed, the womb, or the essence of a complete Buddha, right? That is temporarily fallen into some mental afflictions. And that's where the compassion comes in, right? So the Buddhas look at you and they see this precious, primordially pure essence of a complete Buddha, right? The seed, they see that it's fallen temporarily into these adventitious mental afflictions. And so they rain down, right, the Dharma to try to help purify that, right? And again, and how do they, they do that through all the different teachings, including this one, right? So that's what this is. This and the other teachings you hear are that attempt by the Buddhas. And remember though, the Buddhas are not, nobody ever says that the Buddhas are omnipotent. Right? The Buddha himself is not said he's not, he's not omnipotent. So like they offer that, and then it's up to you. Right? Like in other words, you have free will, you have choice, but that the Buddhas continually are trying to offer you a way to purify that. And then you can take it or leave it. You can practice it a little, you can practice it a lot. It's up to you. But but that's an expression, the point is like, so the Buddhas out of their compassion are raining down the Dharma. And that makes me think of that. There's the metaphor of the upturned pot, right? And Lamrim. You can be an upside down pot that doesn't let any water in. That's up to you. But the Buddhas will keep the Dharma's there, and you can turn your pot right, and they can, and let the water in, or you cannot. But the Buddhas, that's how they'll still, actually, even when your pot's upside down, the Buddhas will still see you as somebody with Buddha nature, right? It's amazing, isn't it? Which is why, anyway, so the Buddhas will see you that way always, because that's who you are. Until you, even after you awaken to it, they'll see you that way, but they're trying to help you awaken to that. No comment or question? No. Maybe I'll do one more of these, and then we'll see how we're at. So this next one is the treasure under the house of a poor person. Right. So just like an inexhaustible treasure lies in the earth under the house of a poor man, but he does not know it, the treasure does not announce itself with "Here I am." Right. So again, pause there. Right. Like, do you get the metaphor? And again, I think these are worth like spending time on. I want to suggest homework assignment. Here's my suggestion, do what you want, but is to actually contemplate these in reference to yourself. Does that make sense? So just to think about the 5 we're covering today in reference to yourself. So, the poor person, right? It was like, again, it's getting at identity, isn't it? Like we feel poor, don't we, sometimes, right? Like, and there are various ways. You could feel financially poor, you could feel spiritually poor, you could feel poor in the sense of why me, or why is my life like this, or why can't I accomplish X, Y, or Z, or and what this is saying is, even when you're at your poorest, right inside, and again, you get the metaphor here, right inside your house, not even in your yard, right? It's right inside your house, under the earth, in that earth, right? And so inside your house, under that earth, is like, oh gosh, it's like, in the movies where there's treasure, like a treasure, like you open the thing and there's all this jewels there, the pirates thing or something. Right, it's right there, but the treasure can't, it says here, the treasure does not announce itself. So the treasure can't call out to you. It's a metaphor, right? For like this, the silver coins and gold coins can't say, I'm silver and gold, like right here. Don't, you can have food, you can have whatever you want, you can have wealth. They don't say that, but they're there, right? Similarly, the precious treasure enclosed within the mind, right? So the house is a metaphor for your own mind, right? So this is you, right? Again, like you're like that person who thinks that, and you get the metaphor. You're also a simile. The person thinks they're poor, but they're not poor, but they're acting poor. Like they're actually suffering from poverty, although they're not poor. It's interesting, isn't it? That's like us, right? We're suffering from the poverty of unenlightened existence, even though we have the treasure right here within our own mind, right? That treasure is by nature free from defilement, with neither of the 2 kinds of selflessness to be established, or the 2 kinds of selves to be refuted, but it is not realized, right? All these beings continuously experience many forms of suffering of poverty. Right? Right, so in other words, and what it says, neither of the 2 kinds of selflessness to be established, nor the 2 kinds of selves be refuted. What that's getting at here is 2 types of self, or self, self of persons and self of phenomena. Right? And so what it's saying is actually the inherently existent self is not something to be removed because it never existed. In other words, you impute it, we impute it, but you don't have to remove it because it doesn't actually exist, right? And the self of phenomena also, it's like, it could feel like you have to get rid of something, actually. But the self of phenomena doesn't exist in phenomena, even conventionally, right? There's no inherently existent self of phenomena or of persons, ultimately or conventionally, that exists. It's just a hallucination. And so that's why it's saying they don't have to be established or refuted. Or is the natural purity already is there as the nature of things naturally? Yeah, it already exists actually naturally. And it's the only thing that is kind of funny. The only thing you have to refute is something you have to refute the existence. You have to refute that something that doesn't. You have to prove to yourself that something that doesn't exist doesn't exist. Like, that's not that hard. Is what it is hard in some ways, but Maitreya is pointing out it shouldn't be impossible. And because you're not doing that, right? We, continually experience the suffering of poverty, even though we're wealthy. John, yeah. Right.
Yeah, it's just such an interesting discussion, and it's just, I think that's one reason I love this scripture so much, because it really gets to the meat of the matter.
Yeah.
Just, that we have Buddha nature, but we continue suffering. And so I think a lot about what it means for a Sangha to have practiced so diligently, with such perseverance for 12 years, and yet still could not see Maitreya until that critical point. And, for Maitreya to have been there with him all along, that nature of enlightenment was there with him all along. And then what prevented him from seeing that? And my way of thinking about it is basically it's just the karma that we've collected, that blueprint and that ground of habitual dispositions that we've accumulated from beginningless time, that it's just so ironclad that it forces us to keep perceiving the filth, and and keeps forcing us to not recognize that what is right under our own feet is this boundless treasure. And another thing I think about too is just that I try to think about what it must be like to have an enlightened mind. That simultaneous perception of the two truths. And so with Maitreya, to have been there with the Sangha all along, thinking, you poor slob, you're bound up in your mental afflictions, and you can't get free of them. But if you could just see that they actually have no ultimate existence, no actual power to enslave you the way they are, that you could be free. And then what it took to actually get free of that is just, I think that's one of the most beautiful stories in all of the scriptures. It's just that, when Asanga had that very deep-seated realization of compassion, that just obliterated, that karma, and purified it. And then the world opened up to him, the world of enlightenment. And just one other thing too, and that's why I find the teaching on the two truths so rich, is that perception of an enlightened being, to in that first simile that we began with, what was the first simile again? That's the
the lotus with the Buddha.
Lotus. So to an enlightened being, I think that my sense of it is that they themselves in their own enlightened mind are not perceiving any decaying flower. But to the extent they understand that there is a decaying flower, they're perceiving it through the karma of that mentally afflicted being. And that thereby gives rise to this compassion that determines their whole reason for appearing to us, to free us up from that karma that forces us to perceive that decay and that pollution. So, yeah, I mean, it's just so extraordinarily interesting, to think about, the meaning of adventitious versus the thing that genuinely exists, that genuinely has its suchness, that is genuinely reality, and how we break free of those of that is simply adventitious and see. So to me, it's all just a matter of purification that we have to begin with studying the teachings and then contemplate them, and then finally get to that realization, whereby we can actually break through and not just have an intellectual understanding of it, but actually have that deep-seated realization that arises from within us, because that is the Buddha nature, right? Within us, that wound is within all of us, and then see it directly. So that's, I don't know, I think to me, this is the most valuable scripture that I've ever studied. I mean, I think it's just absolutely extraordinary. And I think that's why it is a bridge from Sutra to Tantra. So, one of my teachers said, some years ago when I was studying with him, that if we study Sutra very deeply and have the realizations of the Lam Rim, that Tantra actually just begins happening automatically. That it's not just so much a matter of initiation and so on, which may be essential, but at the same time, it's just that begins happening. You get on that bridge and you start crossing it, and that it just starts happening. The world starts purifying. Because our mental afflictions, we start seeing through them.
Thanks for sharing these reflections.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like what you said about, if you contemplate the inspiration to do the practices, to do the purification, to practice to meditate on emptiness also, is part of, I think, what if one is understanding this correctly, I think that it leads to that, doesn't it? An inspiration to engage in practice.
Yeah, another thing too is just that in thinking about that, in thinking about what it means to achieve pure perception, just like you were saying earlier, I mean, I just often reflect on, why is my perception so polluted? And what is it about the strength of karma that keeps forcing that? And so when I try to catch myself when I'm getting annoyed or if I'm getting jealous, and I try to see through that, and that helps a lot. Again, one of my teachers had this funny way of putting it, saying, there's not enough room enough in this city for wisdom and mental afflictions. One of us has to go, right? So it's like the shootout. But I think that, and often when I wake up from dreams too, I think about how remarkably mentally afflicted that dream was, that, despite the fact that I think about Dharma all the time when I'm awake, and that I study and that I contemplate and that I meditate, in my dreams, those mental afflictions are just still really ironclad, and they're still just so polluting. But then there are those occasional very wonderful dreams where, maybe you're flying or Dalai Lama appears or something, so it's seeping through. But I can see why it may well take 3 countless eons unless we take the short path, right? If we develop a state of mind where we're qualified for that. So.
Stop, but yeah, I just think so. Well, we're going to continue on this next class, and I want to suggest that though, because I think it picks up on what you were saying, is I do want to suggest that there's like for a home, I'm looking up when the next class is too, just to remember, but I do want to suggest that for like a homework is just to contemplate these similes, and at least the first five, and we didn't finish the fifth. There's one more verse, but and what we're going to continue. We go over them again, by the way, and talk about different, what this symbolizes and what that symbolizes in the simile in different details. But for now, I just want to suggest. Oh yes, next week class. But I just want to suggest that is to kind of contemplate these similes specifically in relation to yourself. So like feeling, wow, how do I identify with the mud, or how do I identify as impoverished, although, and then is there a sense in which I can see how I identify as impoverished, even though I have a treasure? Is there a sense in which I identify with mud, even though there's gold? Is there a sense in which I'm identifying with the agitated bees when when the sweet honey is already abiding there, and so on, in the nature of my mind? And just to contemplate that, and maybe next time we'll pause and see if people want to share anything from their experience as they contemplated it.
This reminds me of a lesson from a long time ago where we thought of somebody we loved and we wished them well. Then we did so with someone who was neutral, and then there was someone we really did like, okay? And that was always the hardest one, right? So I think it was this week. I really don't like Trump. And it's very hard for me to see any redeeming features. And then out of the blue, we started talking about, and he has a terrible relationship. Took money from them, took money from the children, disabled. I mean, he's done really bad things. And then he said, this was in light of the Hunter Biden addiction. He said something like, addiction is a really terrible thing. My brother was an alcoholic, so I know it was a terrible thing. And that was the first human thing I'd ever heard him say. Because I think he's everything everyone says about him, narcissist, inhuman, And I thought, well, that was really human. And I don't know if I didn't do this practice, I could have realized it.
And it really is interesting, isn't it? I mean, what the teaching, one is the naturally abiding Buddha nature, but even the developing Buddha nature, what Maitreya is saying is like, which is like a capacity for something that that even genuinely, like people who are really doing extremely or very hateful and doing terrible things do have some capacity to care about, in moments at least, about someone or something. And that's the nature of the mind, is such that will happen sometimes. It's interesting.
And it's also, I think, a little bit of progress for me to see.
Yeah. I can see what you mean. Yeah. Well, and I know we should stop, but I also just want to mention, just for a practical, that next class next week, the link will be the same for this. And then starting in July, there's going to be a new link. And so because the center's changing something with its Zoom accounts and so on. So next week, just use the same link, anybody who's logging on. But starting in July, a new link will be sent out to everybody, and it'll be on the website. I'll mention that next week too. I just want people to know so there's no confusion. So next week will be the same, but then in July, we're going to change it, and there'll be more on that later. But I'll say it again next week, just so that I don't want anybody to be confused and sort of having trouble in July.
And I'll have it in the newsletter too. So
good.
Like you just go to the newsletter and
so it'll be on the newsletter and the website. Okay. Oh, and we should do the dedication. So the supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. I dedicate all these merits, which are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, so that the I, who is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, may achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side. In order to lead all mother sentient beings, who are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, to the state of enlightenment, as quickly as possible. Okay, may we all, through studying this very precious teaching of the Buddha and Maitreya, may we be able to actually, realize the nature of our own mind as like the Buddha within the decaying lotus, or it's like the gold within the mud, or it's like the treasure under the ground of the person who thought they were poor, or honey protected by the bees. So maybe we'd be able to actually realize, maybe be able to remove the adventitious defilements, even their subtlest imprints, and realize realize the already existing very precious essence of a Tathagata, essence of a Buddha that already exists within the nature of our being. Maybe I'll be able to do that as quickly as possible, just as the Buddha and just as Maitreya did. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Wonderful, wonderful class.
Thanks.
I'm so happy you're back.
Oh, thanks.